Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Got some more parts to install today on the Civic. Going to move on to some suspension parts. So I'll show you what I've got. So what I've got here is a front traction bar kit. So this bar goes across the front where your tow hook mounts in the side here. And then these bars come back to your front lower control arm where these bolt on. And this is the hardware that goes in it. This is to help prevent wheel hop under acceleration or accelerating through corners. I've also got these mounts to go on where the transmission bolts to the car. These were quite cheap. When I bought them, they actually sent me 10 of them instead of the one set. And then that's the hardware there. That'll just stop under heavy acceleration or dropping the clutch. It'll just prevent the transmission moving around in the chassis. So first step here is just we need to jack up the car and then get under from the front. Okay, so now you've jacked your car up and you've come under. This is the front end of the car where the radiator is. This is the toe mount. You can see there's 3 bolts holding it in. Coming to the other side, there's another one with 3 bolts. So what we need to do is remove these 2 mounts, and the 3 holes will line up corresponding to what car yours is going in. So it can be moved, it can go higher or lower. For this EG, I can't actually go any higher because it is touching on the radiator mount there. So I'm using the top 3 holes. Okay, next step, we need to remove this nut and this bolt from the lower control arm, because we'll be attaching this bracket onto these 2 holes here, and then from this mount here, the actual tie bar will go to the front where we've just mounted it. Before you install the tie rod or any other adjustable suspension, I always like to screw both of them all the way in so they're at the same point. And then when we're installing it and we turn it through the middle and both sides are attached, both ends will unscrew out and become longer at the same rate. If we do them one at a time, you may have to measure, but the length on one side may be longer and shorter on the other. The one that's threaded out further is going to be weaker because there'll be more leverage on that thread. So we want to make them both the same. Okay, so now we have the traction bar itself. So this goes in the mount at the front there, and then in the mount we just bolted at the back here. it's loose inside. So in this kit they're given some washers that will go inside between the outsides. So this is the front one, not bolted up yet, and you can see the gap here. And the back one. Next step, we need to do this nut up and the other nut up for both sides. So now you've done up the end lock nut on both sides. We want to turn this traction bar by hand until it's about as tight as you can turn it. And then at that point, these nuts we can turn in and lock them down. Okay, so now you've locked down your nuts. I recommend that you just position the spherical joint up and down. You don't want the joint on an angle like that because it'll wear funny. You just want to center it, so you can just use a spanner like that and just position it in the center. Same for this one. Next, we're going to be replacing these torque mounts on the side of the engine and the gearbox. So to undo them, we need to remove this nut and we need to remove these bolts either side. So with the wheel turned or removed, you can get access to the 19mm nut here. I wasn't able to successfully remove the mount by dropping the engine, so it looks like I'm going to have to remove the rest of the mount and remove those 3 bolts there. So I just removed 2 of the 3 bolts and swung the arm down. This is the torque mount that come out, so you can see it's quite split and loose. So going to put the new one on now. So I have the first mount put in. There was a few issues. The bolts that mount up into the chassis, one was cross-threaded, so I had to tap out the hole again. Also, you can see the bolts I've used are different to the ones that were supplied. The ones in the kit were 10 by 1.5 thread pitch instead of 1.25, so they wouldn't go in the hole. So I had to use some of the other bolts I had. I also had to play around with the washer spacing because the holes were recessed. I couldn't actually fit a socket around the bolt that I was using, as these are much smaller and have space around the hole. So then this washer towards the engine centered the holes enough that I could fit a socket in there to do it up. On the outside, I've just used the original washer and nut to go on there. So now I'm going to move on to the other side. So the other side is quite similar, that we have to remove this bracket. Luckily for me, I don't have the aircon compressor mounted on there, so I just need to undo the 4 bolts and then the 2 under there holding it to the rail and the nut on the back. Okay, so I've got the other side mounted in there. On the engine side, I put the larger of the 2 spaces and just the standard washer and nut on the other side. I also had to change the bolts under that one as well because the thread pitch was different. So just finished up, you can see the bar where we have the tow hook mounts and the traction bar arm both sides. You can barely see the new mount down there. You can see the new mount there as well. So installing the mounts took longer than the traction bar just because I didn't have any instructions and I had to work out which way to put the spacers on, and then I had to tap some of the threads because they were stripped, and I had to find some other bolts as well. So it took me about 3 or 4 hours to get the traction bar and the mounts done. So they're all in now. I'm happy with how they look. Shouldn't need to get a wheel alignment, but I definitely want to give it a drive and see how it feels now. Alright, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.